What's going on, everybody? This is Jerome Moore, host and creator of Deep Dish Conversations. And firstly, I want to say thank you for all love and support, and thank you for exploring the perspectives of social change with me on this platform. I want to encourage you all to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast listen platform. And make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you're loving the Deep Dish Conversations. I appreciate all of the support again. I hope you all enjoy this episode.
This is deep dish, right?
Yeah, well, let's get deep.
So I'm going deep on both sides.
Amber, welcome to the platform. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Welcome to Nashville for your
Thank
second
you.
time. And I need to give you that tour eventually,
Right.
from a Nashville native.
Right.
Hopefully you enjoyed your time in, Southern hospitality here.
I've enjoyed my time thus far, yeah.
You had
absolutely.
some Nashville hot chicken yet?
Nope.
You ain't even been here then. You might as well ain't even been here. I'm really excited to get into our conversation, and this is the first Deep Dish conversation off-site.
Yeah.
And so I'm really...
I was wondering about that.
Yeah. So I'm excited to talk to you about your art and
Thank
what
you.
that means
Right.
to you, but also what that means to the society we live in, historically and currently, especially from a social justice lens, in which I know the approach that you take, just in your personal life, but also in your art.
Absolutely.
And so let's talk about the beginning. Where did this inspiration to want to dive into art, be an artist, come from? And I know this is probably a hell of a journey for you. So give us the condensed, straight to the meat and bones version, and then we can kind of dive more into that.
So, it might sound a little fairy tale-ish, but literally I've known I wanted to be an artist since I was 8. My mother made sure to expose the importance of creating very early on for myself and my younger brother. And creating early on just became a way of expressing myself and sharing my concerns with either with myself, through journaling and drawing, or with others. And I remember my first art teacher that really made a point to show and share my work with the class, type of thing. And when she really appreciated my work, and I remember how that felt, and it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this is a tool. This is one of the ways in which I successfully convey point or a concept or whatever. And I probably couldn't verbalize it at that point in the same way, but it was a clear connection to who I am. And so I've known since I was 8.
Right.
That I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a creator.
I know you talk about the importance and the impact that your mom had on you.
Yeah.
Right? Growing up in Arlington, Virginia.
Yeah.
Right? Can you talk to us a little about that upbringing in Arlington, Virginia, having an Afro-Latina mom, Spanish being your first language initially, and then not wanting to speak Spanish because you was getting teased, right?
Yeah.
Which is a lot of layers underneath that as well. So can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So in the order you said it, if it had happened earlier, meaning if there was more influence and more support in the Spanish, knowing and my Spanish portion of my entity, it might have changed my life tremendously, right? I might not have decided at an early age that I didn't want to speak Spanish, but it didn't, unfortunately. The teasing happened really early, and nobody wants to be bullied. Or nobody deserves to be bullied. Yeah. So my 5-year-old self, decided to tuck away a part of a sliver of who I am, in order to, just cope. Right. As I talk about this, specifically in the body that works behind me that we're going to be talking about, I often mention, I know now as an adult, grown-ass woman, that it was a form of assimilation. But that was the 5-year-old self. Right. That's how she chose to deal with it. But let's go back to my mama. I love my mama. I absolutely do. I don't know if there's such thing as a mama's girl, but I am definitely, one of the poster children of it. My mom found ways to absolutely support my authentic self, and that meant a lot. It meant a tremendous, and I often talk about, like, we all to some extent have been damaged, right? We all to some extent have people that supported us and people that did not, and or people that just did their best, whatever that meant for them. And so I say that, and I love my grandmother, but I also know that the relationships between my mother and some of her people that parented her were not the most ideal, right? And grandma, forgive me, But I say this because I want to make a point that my mother went out of her way to create a different experience for myself and my brother, and eventually other adopted siblings, and that conscious choice impacted me. Because, for example, I don't know if I had grown up with any other human being, would I still end up being the Amber Robles-Gordon that I am today? Because part of our socialization happens through crushing spirits.
Right. And so, I kind of want to just go ahead and jump straight into this because you use the word assimilation, which is very easy to do as a black person and as a black woman, and at 5 or at 25 or at 35 or 45, because the limited presence that you all are in, the limited opportunities historically and currently that you all have to be in spaces of power. And many would feel like, well, in order to get in these spaces, I have to assimilate. I have to conform, whether that's what I do with my body, hair, how I talk, clothing, all of those things, microaggressions, right?
Because those are real.
Yes, because those are real. And so how have you been able to stay your authentic self in the art world and not assimilate and be courageous and brave? Because I really believe in creating a brave space, but I believe being black, and more specifically being a black woman authentically, is brave and courageous in the society, in the United States that we live in.
Amen.
Yeah.
To the last part. I will say that I don't think it's easy, though.
Okay.
I think it's more of things that we realize we have to do.
Okay.
To a certain degree, and some of us, maybe decide not to, and the ramifications of that, based on living in a patriarchal, racist society. Unfortunately, that happens to people that decide not to, or where in the line they go back and forth in relationship to how they represent themselves, right? So I don't think it's easy.
Okay.
It is a daily, from a cellular conversation to a brain, the amount of what are those? Axons and whatever I can't remember the names of the things that go on your brain.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's literally that whole second consciousness, or double consciousness. We have like triple consciousness,
Right.
And if you throw in another Americanism or slash, you are this as well, I think it increases the level of consciousness that you have to be aware of,
Right.
Especially from the point of being a person of color, or having a different sexuality preference, or having a disability, or there's just a range. The more you have to deal with when it comes to accommodating someone else's, the larger scale people in power, the more you have to adjust your consciousness, your behavior. And what's interesting about that is I think that our society is, to some extent, some of us are waking up to that acknowledgement, or in the process of, or they're fighting against it tooth and nail. Because that means that in order for us to acknowledge that, people have to acknowledge themselves. They have to acknowledge their own personal histories and their conscious and or reluctant buy into it. So that was a long answer, and I don't know that it
Yeah,
completely
no.
answered your question.
No, how does that relate to your presence in the art world?
Right, and how did I manage that? How did I manage to maintain it? Okay, yeah, I meant. I don't think I would have been able to if my mother hadn't supported, like I said earlier, my authentic self. And there are certain things that I've had to be very aware of and conscious of, and say that maybe this isn't the path for me when it comes to decisions in my artistic journey. But also, one of the things I absolutely did was I made sure, because I went to I was put in magnet schools, right, in Arlington, Virginia. And so that absolutely directed some of my path, definitely. And I was always one of the handful of what I would call colored people in these larger white school systems, right? And so you really have to be a certain level of good with yourself and or realize that it's something that you have to continually work on in order to sit up with a straight spine, and be good to people, be good to yourselves, and make decisions that are based on your character and how you want to show up in the world, right? And so I have had to take those values and walk them over to the art world. And or when I slip, I got to remind myself, is that how I want to show up for the world and for myself, more importantly? I think it's a level of checks and balances, and it has not always been easy, but.
So I want to dive a little deeper. For us that are not in the art world, like myself,
Yeah.
what does that pushback look like when someone, some organization, institution, gallery, whatever it may be, appreciate you, but maybe want you to go in a different direction with your work, because maybe it is pulling out something from them that they haven't dealt with, and your work is calling it out. And it can be experiences that you just know people of color experience.
Yeah, maybe not something I've experienced directly myself.
Or both, we'll take both of them. We'll take it all.
Right. I've had. Let me say what I've heard. What I've heard the worst of is absolutely of other people's experiences.
Okay.
I've heard where they have gone to, usually in MFA programs, and they come with a very specific narrative and perspective, and they have been chipped away at, like little cuts, in relationship to how does that relate to the art? How does that relate to the aesthetics? How does that relate to your, overall what you want to achieve? And to me, there's a certain level of teaching and awareness that a person has to have, and to be able to push back on that narrative, that dialogue, because to some extent it is so biased and so based on to some extent a white lens and how the art world runs, right? Because they can question you or question people of color, it's because they don't have the working knowledge of the other histories. Not just your personal social contract and how you came to where you are in relationship to what you create, but it's also that sometimes these institutions don't do the work culturally in other areas of the world beyond European perspective, European artwork. So, and our society has not deemed it necessary to a certain extent for them to do that work. And I believe that we have to push back on that. I've always believed that we have to push back on that. It's gotten me in trouble, but.
What is trouble? What does that mean? What does that trouble look like?
You get people that, like for example, the follow-up that doesn't happen. You're being told in your face that they're going to do this and do that, or follow up, or they're a great right person for this, and you find out later the follow-up does not happen.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to chalk that up to I had to be my most authentic self without, and I say that because some people hear that and think that means that you can, basically act out or act any kind of way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I have to be able to go to sleep with who I am every night and consciously be aware of how I treat myself and or other people and be good with that.
Right.
I think that's how you balance who your authentic self is.
It has labeled here, as far as your who you are as an artist, is a multimedia visual artist.
Right.
That was a new term for me.
Yeah.
That I've never seen or heard being self-described as an artist. Can you break that down? Did you come up with that label?
Oh, absolutely not. No.
Is that something
That's
common?
that's something that's in the art industry.
We're
So what
learning here, but we're learning.
right.
But no,
So
what does that? What
what
does
that
mean?
means is that you are, to some extent, you dabble in various mediums
Okay.
in relationship to how you decide to create artwork. So,
Okay.
for example, that is specifically talking more of in relationship to like photography, in relationship to video, in relationship to some of the new or digital or video medias, and some of those I have been keeping under the wraps or still working on some of those things that I for myself, and hopefully I will eventually share with others. But it's about the mediums, meaning the mechanism or technique that you decide to convey a subject matter in art, right?
Okay.
So that's what that means.
Okay.
Versus somebody that's only a painter,
Okay.
which is fine too.
Yeah. I think I know myself personally have learned to appreciate different forms of art
Right.
outside of like I think what most people are common to is the painting on a canvas. And
Yeah, they
type-
tend to go towards the only what they consider the traditional,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is crap.
Yeah, well, no, let's talk about it. Like, why is that crap? And do you see multimedia visual artists getting more exposure, being more appreciated now, or is that something that's still opening up?
Right.
Or more people are dabbling into that form of art outside of traditional painting?
So the answer is yes to the latter part of your question, and that's because of what the mediums that we have access to. We have access to video, we have access to photography literally in our back pockets or in our purses or wallet, whatever.
Right.
Meaning now we even have, videos on our phones. And so more people have access to the methods in which to create and dive into that aspect of creation. The reasoning behind the traditional, what I was kind of being snarky about in relation to painting being a traditional medium, that is part of the European lens. And so, for example, if you do the research in relationship to how the art industry has formulated itself, part of that is based on a very European standard of creating, and how traditionally it's seen out of a European canon, right? And so the work I was talking about before, how some curators or some art historians or some critics, and I was saying that they don't do the work in relationship to building up, researching and building up when it comes to in writing about works, artists and artwork from people of color. It's because they've been trained that one way of looking, one overall way of looking, one lens is important, is valuable. In all honesty, it's just a form of white supremacy. Because it's basically saying if you are not dictating, creating in what we think is aesthetically beautiful, then you're relegated to over here.
Right.
And that's what the artists, plural, that's one of the main things that we have to continually push back on. Because we know that that's not the case.
Right.
Beauty is not just seen and should not be seen as just one palette, one person, one type of beauty. It's stupid.
You brought up a word there that I'm excited to get into is history, because when I see the art that's behind you, And when I've seen your previous work, in the thought process, in the research that has to go into it. So I'm curious if you can, because you have to be like damn near a historian, and really dig into these things and these concepts. You're just not just putting anything together.
Yeah, definitely not.
Without like no kind of educational awareness behind it, which I think is amazing, and I think shows a level of art intellect that I appreciate, right? And it dives deeper than just looking at it, because there's something to it, right? That you're connecting and that you're fusing. So can you take us through like that process of of your creation, whether it's one of these quilts that's behind us, or just your process when you're thinking about creating a new piece of art?
Yeah, and it's actually part of the process that I have really fortunate that I love as well, So for example, let me use the quilts. It's a longer story, but what it comes to is I'm usually engaged or triggered by something that happens to either someone that I see or something that I'm going through in relationship to like the cycles, your process of life, where you are in life. And then you kind of have to dissect what's happening, why is this happening, why do I think it's happening, and then you have to literally walk the path. You have to do the research. And for example, the works that led to this series behind me, which is Successions: Traversing U.S. Colonialism, and it's a combination of, now I think it's 7 or 8 quilts, and the first 5, 6 are representing the U.S. territories. But let me go back. So I was led to this by a series called Place of Breath and Birth. So as I described earlier, I my 5-year-old self went to my mother and told her that I didn't want to speak Spanish anymore because I was being bullied, right? And so then later on in life, because I was raised in Arlington, Virginia, but by a certain age, I decided that I needed to be able to go back and have a relationship with my birthplace, Puerto Rico. And so I eventually did that. I reached out to a writer who had been writing about my work on, I think it's called Black Art in Puerto Rico. Okay. His name is Edwin Velasquez Coloso. And I try and mention his name every time because I need him to know how intricate, and important he was in this process, because he started to put my art and my name in this context of Afro-Latina, it was like so empowering. He helped me get some of that back. And I haven't told him directly that, but hopefully he'll see this. But so that led to he recommended my work to, her name is Norma Vila, of the Universidad del Sagrado de Corazón, which is Sacred Heart University. And she asked me to give a proposal, and I proposed the show, Place of Breath and Birth. And literally what I would be doing is researching about my own personal heritage, researching about the treatment of Puerto Ricans by the U.S. government, coming to the university for a period of time, and then I came back doing a residency there, a self-appointed residency. I also did a couple artist talks and things like that there. So through that research, I realized that it's not only about the ill treatment of Puerto Rican U.S. citizens. This is about anti-Blackness, right? I started to realize that it's also the treatment of U.S. citizens that are part of the U.S. territories, right? And so at the time, I was working on a body of work, Place of Breath and Birth, for my solo exhibition at American University, and I went back to my curators at the time, Larry Osamensa, and I say his name with like the Spanish, which is funny, but and Jack Rasmussen, who's the director of the American University Museums. And I was like, look, I know we thought that I was going to be creating, one-sided quilts, but I need to make these double-sided. And what that meant was, because I was looking at the works, and I was working on 2 of the political quilts side by side. And, they're all based on factual information, right? Mm-hmm. But it was just that my energy couldn't only allow me to deposit them into the world with just criticism, In some ways, I felt like that would also be what I am criticizing in relationship to how the U.S. has treated millions of people, and I needed to be able to give them an additional artistic life, if that makes any sense. I wanted you to have to confront what I'm saying on the front in relation to the political side, and I wanted you to have to walk around and then see humanity.
Right. What did that? I'm a big time traveler, but explorer. Like I just like to see myself as an explorer, and it seemed like you did a lot of exploring, just not with in your art, but internally with you. How did that reaching back and going back to Puerto Rico, your birthplace, and just your family, lineage, heritage? How did that like manifest in you and change you, make you better? How did that change your art and the outlook of like who you are as a person, but also as an artist?
Man, you be dropping loaded questions. That's like
I told you, deep dish conversations. We're gonna get into it,
right.
and so we here for you. We here to get all into your business.
Okay, awesome question. So
start wherever you want to start.
I know.
Start wherever you want to start.
I know. I think so. One of the perspectives, and I think, for example, I tend to not work small,
Okay.
right? And so the place of breath and birth are 18 by 24, and they're these very dense, layered collages. And even some people have, when they've come up to them, they see them as small flags, right? And to some extent, they may very well be. But I literally, my goal was just to distill all this like emotional information, visual information, cultural information, and slight critique, all on this plane, and I absolutely think that was definitely a combination of being an Afro-Latina, going to Puerto Rico, also being raised in Arlington, Virginia, and living in the District of Columbia for 20-something years, but still being able to condense that onto a 18 by 24 canvas, so it gave me so many layers of insight.
Returning back home to Puerto Rico, your birthplace.
Right.
I'm curious of like once you touch down, black woman, another country.
It's not another country.
Not another country, a territory.
Right.
Thank you. We all learning and growing here. Thank you, Amber. How were you received by Puerto Ricans and like the looks that they were giving you possibly? Because I understand like blackness is not a monolith. Blackness looks different in different places, but people can kind of tell like your hue is a little different, or this, and so I'm just curious on how that experience was for you and some of those conversations you might have had about your American blackness compared to, being Afro-Latino, Puerto Rican blackness, because we know there's black people, Cuba, we know there's black people
all over the world. Right.
And
so and it manifests differently.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit about that initial touchdown experience and maybe some of the conversations you had with locals there. And maybe some of the conversations you had about your work with them and the story that you were trying to tell. Again, another loaded, but we curious. We want to know.
Yeah, that is a loaded question. So the first thing that comes to mind is that I think I need more of those experiences.
Okay.
And because, for example, Mother Nature got in the way of some of that. For example, I was supposed to have a solo exhibition, a live in-person solo exhibition at Sagrada de Corazon, their university art gallery, but it was shut down. It needed to be. It had a whole a series of repairs that needed to happen because of some water damage, right? So the show got moved to an online platform. But even in the time prior to that, when my mother and I went there for 2 weeks to be introduced to the curator, the provost, things like that. I mean, the response was definitely welcoming, but that's also from the art, curator, university perspective. So, for example, I haven't, because that physical exhibit didn't happen, I haven't had that direct response from a large group, an audience of Puerto Ricans, much less Afro-Puerto Ricans. Yeah. I've definitely had people reach out to me as they see where I'm going with this particular 2 series of works, right? And there, what I found, I was even telling Susan, the gallery owner of this space, I was like, I'm getting all these emails and people that are realizing, like, in more like the full layered self who I am, they're like connecting me with other Latinas. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And I hope that this absolutely continues. So that's been very interesting. But definitely it's been more on the level of art administrators that happen to be of Latina descent or Latino descent, that they're reaching out to me saying, Amber, plug into this, Amber, plug into that. And I'm absolutely grateful. But I need that other ground level of interaction with the works, like even more so. So I'm going to jump ahead, because part of, my overall mission for the works, both Place of Breath and Birth and Success in Traversing U.S. Colonialism, is to stimulate, to further contribute to a conversation about people of the greater majority. So, for example, 80% of the world, is not Europeans or white people, as they may want us to believe, and as they structure, the news, as they structure education, as they structure or destructure history, and how it's presented and fed to us is as though they are. But that is not the case, and it hasn't been the case in a very long time, right? Because the majority of the people in this world are people with more melanin, people of color.
It's a fact.
It's a fact. And actually what you're seeing, the instances of just what I consider craziness that's happening in our world right now is a pushback on that. Is a pushback of them feeling the lack of control. So my point real quick is that I want this dialogue, these 2 bodies of works, to, one, like Place of Breath and Birth, to specifically support other Afro-Puerto Ricans and Boricuas, but then this body of work, I need for people of color to treat each other differently. We need to start looking at each other with our own lens, a clean lens that's devoid of anti-Blackness. And so there is a term that I cannot remember right now. I want to say it's supernatural, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a term that basically talks about working through nationality, working through race, and working towards a greater community that is based on how do we treat humanity, how do we treat human beings outside of these constructs that we have built and formed and stuck ourselves in, and or allowed ourselves to be siloed in. Because until we do that, we will always be headbutted against white supremacy. And so I want that conversation to begin, and I say begin. I'm not saying that this work is the end all, great all, but I want to help contribute to it by looking at the foundation of the United States. Because I don't even talk about, for the most part, this side of welcome to the district of DC political is welcome to the district of colonialism, right? And on the back side is the spiritual side. So it's talking about the people of the indigenous people and or Native Americans that were in the tri-state area, you know, the larger tribes, right? Maryland, DC, and Virginia. But I don't even talk about the when it gets into the tribes, and I kind of step back in that. If I ever am able to have a dialogue, and you know, I want to be able to feel like I'm not treading on anybody's culture. It's not, but I don't even talk about some. I don't talk about Hawaii. I don't talk about the Philippines. I don't talk about the meaning in this work. I don't even talk about the entities, the atolls. Okay,
Right.
which is, you know, basically an island with unpopulated island to some extent, that have more sovereignty, more rights than millions of people that live in the U.S. territories.
Right.
So there's so much more to be addressed. But anyway, it's. I'm hoping that it can contribute to that continued conversation that absolutely needs to happen.
Yeah, we finna unpack a lot more. We finna get a little deeper.
Okay.
Because with your work, with what I can tell from my studying, like you really dive into institutional structural racism, U.S. colonialism, anti-blackness, as you mentioned, and not only how it affects, you know, us right here in the United States, but also people outside of our, you know, borders and people in U.S. territories. And I want to bring up this word to you. That's a loaded word because you know I'm just giving you all loaded things today. But the word justice, because it seems like that's what you're trying to highlight in many ways, the lack of justice for many folks in the United States and U.S. territories that they still haven't received any justice for the harm and violence that have been done to them historically and currently. And there's harm that has been done to black folks and people of color in this country historically and currently as well. And so what does justice mean? Because I think that word means something different to everybody. What does it mean, and what does it look like personally and within your art?
I don't think we've seen justice yet.
So we don't even know what it looks like.
No, we don't know what it looks like. Because, you know, that whole continuum, you know, and I'm going to use the word incorrectly, but I'm doing it for a reason, or the term correctly, like a time continuum. You know, everywhere that we have seen little instances of justice around the corner, down the block, it's being imposed, it's being stripped away from others. And I think that I think this is probably the fourth time I've said white supremacy, but the way that our society is built, the way that our world has been constructed or adapted, because it wasn't constructed. We weren't born racist, you know, and we use capitalism as a crutch, as a evil guide, you know, to some extent, to allow us to enslave and or to put people in just horrible situations in order to make money and make societies, basically the foundations of society, and continue to them.
Right.
You know, once we've given a certain measure, and I say we, but I don't necessarily include myself in this because I'm talking about overall Americanism, you know, and the way that our society's been built. Once we move someone up, a group of people up into a little, we've given them a little bit of leverage, right? Then we move another grouping of people underneath so that they can do the groundwork. Right? Without it is a really awful system. And it's not just Americans. Imperialism has happened all over the world. Colonialism has happened, you know, and it affects, for the most part, people of color, women, people that don't have a certain amount of education, and are relegated to a, say it again?
And poor folks.
Exactly. And we replicate this because we have not allowed ourselves to think outside and or just do better. And you said earlier, shame on them, shame on us.
Right. Power. What power does art hold for you in order to call out some of the things that we've talked about and that you just mentioned, to possibly find out what justice looks like or to get some type of justice? What role can art play in that?
So, art is a very interesting term, right? It's an overall overarching term. And when we say it, we're not just talking about physical, product, right? Physical artwork, whether it be a painting, it's a whole range of things.
Right.
So, for example, art can be talking about musicians, right? It can be talking about musical compositions. It can be even, referring to in relationship to design,
Architecture,
right?
yeah.
Architecture. It's how we formulate concepts and then how we aesthetically present them to the rest of the world.
Right.
And so I absolutely think that people in the art industry, we have more understanding of the power of art, right? Because our passion has driven us to it, either passion or money. E-commerce, has driven us to it. I think what happens is that people outside of those realms don't realize how much they're impacted because they don't realize that art includes the image, whether it's a still image and or it's a reeling image, ongoing image, right? And the people that are in control of what you see, that's the power, right? And then underneath that, the people that are controlled with how they interject narrative, that's the power. And I think that we're at a point where people are questioning versus what you show me visually and what you interject in relationship to text and voice and overlaying that on what you're presenting me visually. And we're seeing contradictions that we cannot overlook, that many of us cannot overlook, right? And I think it's an interesting place to be in our society, and that is what I'm pushing to. I don't know. I don't even know how to phrase that. That's one of the things I'm pushing in the works, that I am an alternative way of looking at where we are.
Right. Expectations. What are your own expectations around the uplifting, calling out Americanism, anti-Blackness, injustices, all these things? What expectations do you have for yourself that you set for yourself when it comes to creating the work that you do, with understanding these are the things that I want to make sure I call out and highlight and present to folks and be able to talk to all the time? You said something. You said, "Hey, I said like white supremacy like 4 times, right?"
Yes.
And for me, like that's, I think that's part of the issue in our society. Is like we should feel comfortable calling it out because it is what it is. Like we need to call it out more, right?
Yeah.
And if it makes people cringe, that's a good thing. Lean into that.
Yeah.
Deal with whatever you're working with, and just have a discussion about it. So, what are your expectations for yourself, and make sure you uphold the level of commitment to calling those things out in your art that you have? Yeah, I know I'm killing you. I told you this is going to be one of those ones.
Interesting. So this reminds me of my conversation that you heard with Dr. Kelly Morgan, right? And we were like, there were points in which, I specifically was talking about points in which when I was creating this work, and she was referring to her own curatorial practice and art historian practice, And so there's a term I was trying to pull out of her during that conversation, and I think it's like she says an art disruptor or a disruptor of the colonial mechanism or something like that. And she refers to it in relation to her curatorial practice, and I definitely think, like, for example, the underpinning of my works, even the works that are there and that are more focused on color, form, rhythm. Like, for example, my fabric sculptures that are on chicken wire, right? Like, a lot of people just see patterns, rhythm, and they love it. They're drawn to it. And absolutely, I want you to be. But the truth is the foundational aspects of why I use chicken wire and is a conversation about masculine and feminine energy in our society. And it's about the underpinning of what that wire and what chicken wire is used for to contain basically a female bird that produces a product. And so it's a conversation about sexism. It's a conversation about patriarchy, but yet you see, and for those that's what they see, I want you to see it, keep on seeing it, But for those that want to go deeper, please go deeper, because there's more.
Right.
There's more meaning, there's more layers. But I digress a little bit. But so going back to the heaviness, so what Kelly and I were referring to is the heaviness of the dialogue, of knowing that who you are is going to make you continue to engage and want to interject in these conversations and create work, create create exhibits, a curriculum to support that, to have these conversations. It is heavy as hell. But the thing is that the heaviness, when it comes to previewing our world and our society, our internet, our scrolls, and not feeling as though you're doing enough, at least for my social contracts, my spiritual, who I am as a being, I have to. I have to continue this conversation and or others, that are around what we as a society need to work on. What's her name? Nina Simone says that's part of the work of an artist, and it should be. So this is the other thing I want to get into. It should be the work of, like, it should be part of the civil work of all of us to some extent. Not to say that you have to do it through art, right? But more of us need to be engaged civilly in our society. And some of it, I will say, I do think is a byproduct of social media, and or how engaged we are in video and creating content. And I think a lot of it is absolutely systemic. It is done purposely, where specific areas of study are taken away from our children's lineup of things that they are focusing on in their school systems, right? And I think that we need to find a way to get back to the basis of civics. And I know that's like way left field in relation to an art talk, but it shouldn't be, is my point. We have to find a ways to be more present in our society when it comes to how we hold ourselves accountable and how we hold each other accountable.
And so it leads me to urgency. There's a lot of crises going on right now, right?
Yeah.
There's a reproductive rights and reproductive justice crises, homelessness, criminalizing homelessness crises, anti-blackness crises, white supremacist crises, educational crises, wage crises, right? It's many crises, right?
Yeah.
And so people are dying.
Yeah.
People are being killed. And so when you think about urgency, and we hear, hey, we have to be urgent, the time is now. Clearly, urgency means different things for many people because, again, people are literally dying. So when you think of the word urgency in the work that you need to be doing and want to do, what are your thoughts on that? How do you attack that? And what does that mean to you, urgency?
Tell me why. Why do you ask that question?
I asked that question because we've seen the same thing happen over and over and over again, right? We hear the same rhetoric over and over. Hey, we have to do something now. We have to take action now. Clearly, you know, action looks a little different, or the action that needs to happen is not happening. However, the institutions, the organizations, the systems that keep perpetuating this harm on citizens, on people, on lives, their tactics are forever evolving and changing. And it seems like they have an urgency to keep people oppressed. They have an urgency to continue perpetuating anti-blackness, colonialism, and all of these things. So where does people like yourself and me, what does our urgency look like, and where does that lie? And does our urgency tactics need to change in the lane that we're in? Because everybody is in different lanes. It's not for everybody, I believe, to protest and rally. Everybody's not an organizer.
Yeah.
Everybody's not an artist. And so from your lane, what does that urgency look like in your work in order to help combat the harm and the urgency to harm that the systems continue to perpetuate?
Okay, so urgency is a very like strong and or very specific term that creates a certain level of even like energy around it, right? And that funnels into it. And I don't know. I know that there are places in the world where people have to function in that realm. To me, that's the equivalent of being in survival mode, right? And we know that there are parts of the world that people are daily functioning in survival mode, right? Whether that be, in relationship to actually being in wars or near wars, or being in everyday environments, and like you said, and trying to figure out where's your next meal coming from, right? So, and I will say that there are absolutely the way that the stratosphere of society, people in our society works, they're tiers, right? All of us don't always have to be in urgent mode or in survival mode, right? And which is something I struggle with every day in relationship to why do we live in a world where people have to be in these modes of urgency, right? And because it also equates to where you are in a privilege and access resources, even down to like whether or not you have family and friends supporting you, right? So, for example, I don't know that I can't live my life in urgency mode or in survival mode. And I've been absolutely fortunate, and I'm grateful that I don't have to, right?
Okay.
However, it doesn't mean that I can ignore those that are in it and or the issues that cause us. Because even people to flux in and out of it, because it happens,
Right. I'm curious. That answer is very perplexing to me, because you're a black woman in the United States, which I think is dangerous in itself. But why do you feel like, just because that alone, I feel like you should have some level of urgency in your own way.
Well, let me finish, because I wasn't finished with my answer.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Okay, so what I was going to say is that I think that if all of us lived in that mode, we would be living in an even more chaotic society. I think that we would be, because what happens is that you have the flight or fight. You're not just talking about a word, right? You're talking about a word that then triggers a chemical reaction, an actual body, like in relationship to everything below your brain, and then it sends, information to the rest of your body, and then it comes back and says, okay, this is how we're going to, and sometimes it delays how you then respond to it. So I know that, and not to say that I haven't had modes in my life where I had to function in it, but I've also had to be able to negotiate that, find ways, whether it be through yoga, whether it be through prayer, whether it be through a combination of both, or whether it be through having fun, making sure that I interject fun in between the other stuff that I'm doing. But I cannot function in that mode, and or will I ever. I never want to be in that mode and or wish it on anybody else, because I'm afraid for what we would do if we were, all of us, or much more of us, were in that mode. You think white supremacy is threatened now? What if we were all in that mode? You're seeing it from the perspective, at least this is an assumption, you're seeing it from the perspective of what you're doing, right? And how you've decided to show up in the world. And how your nuggets of how you place and interject your skill and your specialty in the world, right? But that's through your lens. We don't know how other people would function and or show up in the world. In fact, and we don't know how all of them do, but we definitely know how some of them do. Have you seen your Instagram feed? Have you seen what happens on the news when people are in urgency mode?
I want you to get it off.
That's I'm done.
So you said something I think is crucial. Through people's lens, and perspective, which I should have been more clear about, because I think urgency is not going to look the same for everybody, right? And so that's why I was kind of perplexed by your answer, because I think your artwork is a representation of urgency to me. I think this
so we have different definitions of urgency.
Yeah, and so in urgency when it comes to addressing certain social justice issues is like specifically. I think that urgency shows up differently because you didn't have to do the work that you did, but you recognized something through your journey, through your lived experience.
But I'm telling you that I did have to do the work that I did.
Yeah, you're right.
Because my energy would not allow me not to. There were points where I had to look back and say, oh, am I going to stop this?
Right. But see, to me, that's a sense of like urgency, spiritually, emotionally. Like I think to me, how I am looking and defining urgency.
Yeah.
And I think that looks different in compared to also the opposition of people who want to keep people oppressed.
Yeah.
That urgency looks like criminalizing homelessness, right? So so that's what I mean by urgency, and that's why it's not all like being urgent and rushing and being impatient. Right? Not that type
and not
of...
necessarily in survival mode.
Yeah,
Because
not
when you say
necessarily
urgency, I think of
mode.
survival mode.
Okay, so...
It means that I have to do whatever I need to do in this instance to get out of this situation, right? So if I looked at the work in that way, I don't know what you would get.
Right.
But what I was trying to say is that in relationship to spacing out, because the whole research and planning and creating, it can't... Although the message has an urgency, the execution cannot. Right. If I want the work to be successful.
Right, and I think that's in anything, right? Even organizing on a community level.
Right.
It's long term. A lot of times it's gonna be a long term goal, or a long term plan, so you can have the most effect.
Right.
That you want. Even though sometimes you're gonna have short term urgency, like sometimes we just gotta march and go.
So I gotta take this opportunity to say, just think about that. We're saying urgency in relationship to what we're trying to project to the world in messaging, right? But we're saying, but in order for it to be executed and received as best as it can be in whatever industry you are in, right? In the world, and what I'm interjecting is saying is then on top of that, you also got to take care of yourself.
I agree.
Because that is an urgency.
Right.
You want to be able to live. You want to be able to thrive. You want to provide for your families, But just think about that in relation to what we're talking about, in relation to people of color. Just think about the what we have to maintain
Right.
psychologically in order to continue that along years, days, even minutes.
Yeah.
And on top of that, we live in a white society. As Bell Hooks says, white supremacist, capitalistic. What is that phrase?
I'm not familiar.
Oh, what? Okay, you're not familiar with the phrase. Or you're not familiar with Bell Hooks.
No, for the phrase.
Phrase. Okay, and it might not be Bell Hooks. It might be what's her name? Oh, I can't think of
But
it.
that's that double consciousness thing that you go back to.
It's beyond double
Yeah,
consciousness,
it's
but that's what
beyond-
I'm trying to
yeah,
get to.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
saying that just consider what the baggage we have to maintain
Right.
on such a high level of consciousness,
Right.
even just to get to address these issues of urgency.
Right. I wanna come to some closing questions for you. Pivoting back kind of to the art industry as a whole, and the work that you do, and the message, the urgent message that you're sending with your work. What are some of the things the art industry needs to address so it can be more spaces for you and others that do your type of art, that has your type of message, to amplify that? What does that allyship look like? And what doesn't it look like?
I know that I've been asked this question before, and I think my answer is the same in that because it's really requesting a level of consciousness.
Okay.
I need more people to be self-aware. I need
Okay.
people to be more conscious of how you show up in the world. And I know that's very broad, but it's truth.
Right.
Because whether you are the president of the United States, whether you are a congressman, whether you are an art curator, whether you are an art historian, it's like I need you to see, if you are only looking around and you only see your reflection, you are part of the problem. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, no.
And I don't have to be as creative, and try to. Actually, I'm tired of that. Come to think of it, I'm tired of I think somebody told me earlier today that I don't beat around the bush. Do you know how tiring it is to beat around the bush, especially when you're beating the same damn bush over and over again?
Right. Ain't no bush left.
Thank
Ain't
you.
no
And why
bush
do I
left to
have to
beat.
hit on it? Why can't you be self-aware? Why can't you see how you are showing up in the world and how you are
Because they want you to make
slowly
them feel comfortable.
cutting, beating, traumatizing people?
No, because they want to feel comfortable and safe.
They do. But it's absolute truth.
That's what that is.
That is absolute truth.
But hey, as we know, we all can't be comfortable and safe. So, learn how to navigate it like many of us do.
Bump that. I am comfortable and safe. I'm claiming that.
Oh yeah, and brave.
Hey,
Hey,
I'll claim that too.
and brave. Claim it. Shit, claim that. How can community support more of art, more of this type of messaging in art? What can community do, not just here in Nashville, but in DC and just throughout the United States, throughout the world, and be more intentional about amplifying from a grassroots, boots on the ground, just supporter, but also somebody that, that also cares about the same issues that the art is representing and calling out?
So I'm going to pull in one of the other parts of an earlier question, and you mentioned in relationship to what's going on about Supreme Courts and their decision about abortion laws, and how insinuating by their decision that having an abortion should not be a absolute right, human health care right. And so I absolutely, I think I had just gotten back from Venice, and I was in DC, and I remember just feeling like this can't be real. This cannot be real. And I started to think about my own life and/or decisions, and how I was analyzing how I've tried to show up for myself and for others, and then through my work, right, in the world, and thinking, what can I do differently, you know, and whether it be showing up for protest, signing petitions, you know, and or seeking to better educate myself in certain areas. And I was, how do I continue to contribute? How do I? So one of the ways, and I was thinking about is figuring out how to talk more about my experiences. And I say that meaning not that Amber Robles-Gordon experiences are more valid or whatever versus anybody else, but I mean my woman experiences, right? Because that's one of the areas in which I want to challenge women to do more. And I say that because I don't say that lightly, right? Because I think that so much is put on us, right? And that burden is heavy as hell. And I absolutely think not enough is put on men, our counterparts and our partners in in creating children, flat out, society. You know, we can't do this alone. But I'm saying this in the sense that we have been socialized, women have been socialized not to talk about this intimate part of our lives. It's been relegated to an intimate part of our lives. But the truth is, like I said, men and women create children. Men and women have sex, create children, and or decide not to, right? And or I'm not even gonna talk about the situations in cases of incest, rape, and forced sexual encounters, right? But what I am saying is, even from a young age, we have been taught not to talk about our periods. That we've been trained to when we're sitting and we have a dress on, close your legs and things like that. There's certain things that we have relegated to carry out in society undercover.
Make other people comfortable.
Yes, and ladies,
Make men comfortable.
Ladies, we have to stop doing this bullshit.
Yeah. So
because it's a form of control.
Yeah.
It's a form of how to hide what is associated with our womanness, our girlness, and not relegate it to a level of importance in relationship to this is how women and men show up in the world. So one of the ways in which I've decided to do that was to have more conversations with younger women and or women in general. Like I was in a mall and I was, in a shop, and I happened to start a conversation with the person that worked in the store. And somehow I was like, so what do you think about, what the Supreme Court has done? And we started, and I said, we started to talk. And one of the things I said was like, yeah, what I've decided to do is I'm going to talk more about how I show up, or how we show up in the world in relation to women and the rest of society. And I said to her, I was like, think about that. When's the last time you talked to your father or the males in your family about either your personal experience, sexual experiences? And I'm not saying it's to gross anybody out, but even the fact that I feel like I have to say that. Men talk about their sexual encounters or sexual experiences anywhere and everywhere they feel comfortable, or not even feel comfortable, anywhere they want. But women are not allowed in this society to do the same. And I'm saying that it is all under the same guise of control. We're not supposed to have sexual power. We're not supposed to have sexual or even bodily, what's the word? Autonomy. And that's how, right? That's how in this 2022 that a group of predominantly religious men and Republican can come together and make a judgment on women.
So I want to wrap around to the question a little bit. How can people show up and support art in the messaging that covers those things you're talking about?
Yeah.
But how can people show up for art that calls those things out?
Okay.
What are some easy ways?
How can people show up for art? Damn it! I'm so wrapped up in the
I
other
know,
stuff.
yeah,
I'm like,
no.
I don't know.
Like,
You know.
because I think the reason I asked that question is I think this conversation is going to offer a different lens on how people can digest art.
Yeah.
And look beyond the pretty colors,
Right.
the dyes, and the visual component of it purely. And
Yeah.
so that's why I asked, how can people kind of support and show up for art that represents what they're doing? It just represents it in a different way. But if I'm an organizer, if I'm an activist, and if I care about reproductive rights or reproductive justice, and I know now, there's an artist that also cares the same way, and it's showing that I can uplift that, and we can work in community together. And
You answering your own question, and I'm appreciative
Yeah.
of it.
so
You're answering your
okay,
own question.
so, all
But
right.
what I want to say, in what I was saying in relationship to how I am deciding to further show up in the world, right? I want to challenge people. It's not just about that. Do I want you to see my art? Hell, effing yeah. Just come see my art.
Yeah.
You know, but I want you to see that we have to think about how we are engaged in intersectionality, you know, or how the intersections of how and what we are interested in and what is going on in the world. My artwork, is it about aesthetics? Absolutely. Is it about materiality? Absolutely. Meaning the materials in which I've used to convey a certain concept, right? But my art is about environmental racism. My art is about how we've treated the world and how the world is fighting back. My art is about breaking down or interjecting and challenging white supremacy. My art is about challenging colonialism. I need us to start. My art is about science, because there's science behind why these. So we didn't talk about the way in which our environmental racism shows up in the work, right? But it's also based on science. It's also based on social studies, in the sense that part of what the problem is how the U.S. Has not been taking care of its territories in the way that it should be, and it's showing up in the way that the actual facilities, the buildings, the infrastructure crumbles. We're talking about technology, how it doesn't, it's not as prevalent as it is in the mainland states, United States, right? Or how how it affects the agriculture in the territories, in the sense that if you take the U.S. government, the U.S. Army, armed forces, annexes, takes land from indigenous people that they owned, right? And where they farmed, where they praised, where they celebrated their spirituality, their connection to, it causes ramifications in relationship to their health, diabetes, importing, so there's all these
Layers.
things. Exactly. And I'm saying this is not just about art, although come see my art.
Yeah.
I'm saying we have to stop being one or two-dimensional beings.
And people need to hear that from artists.
Amen. Because
That's why we're having this conversation. Because people
I
need
totally agree with you.
People need to hear that from artists, because if we don't hear artists say that, most people are going to think one or two dimensional about the piece or about an art piece, and that's all they're going to be thinking about. But if we have more artists that say, hey, hold on, wait a minute, before you just take this on visually, let me give you some food for thought so that you can digest with your visual lens as well.
Yeah.
And that gives that invites people to look at it in a 4th, 5th, 6th dimension.
Yes, because we have to dissect the image.
Right. And we can't assume that people are going to do that.
No.
Right?
You're right.
And so that's why I appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate you calling it out. And that's why I was so intrigued and curious to have this conversation, because I want others to hear your voice. And that piece alone is what this conversation is about. And I have one more question for you, then I'm going to let you
more?
in. I got one more. Because we've been talking about a lot of
I mess with you. Ask the
injustices, but a lot of anti-blackness. So I have to ask this: what is black love?
Oh, wow. Wow. So I think Black love starts within, just like it does for any other people, right? But specifically, it starts with like loving your hair, loving your skin tone, loving the way that the sun reacts to your body, you know, loving the way water, being embracing water. Realize that so much of who we are, not only the actual makeup is of water, but water is a conduit, you know. I think it's loving the aunties and uncles that show up differently in your world. I absolutely just believe that it's self-care, it's self-love, and then for yourself, and then extending that outside of yourself. I also think it's a spiritual journey, whether you are religious or not, because spirituality, it does not have to flow through religion or religious practices. It's cellular. And I actually think the Black love is within us all, whether we want to realize it or not. I remember writing a poem called Deep Black. I think it was called Deep Black. And one of the things I would say is that, like, when you close your eyes, what do you see? That's black. It's blackness. It's part of who we are. When you look to the sky at night, and I think we've been trained to run away from it. And yes, I'm associating an actual group of people versus a color, but hello, our society does that and pigeonholes us, because of it. And blackness is love, flat out.
Amber, I've enjoyed thoroughly this conversation, and I know the viewers and the listeners will too. I want to give you the last word before we close. And one, I want you to, extrapolate on anything that we maybe didn't touch on that you want to add a extra to, some emphasis to, and then where people can find more of your artwork online, reach out to you. They want to commission some work from you, and just stay updated on what you have going on.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to focus on with this, specifically this grouping of works, right, is I say that I started this journey to heal my 5-year-old self, right? So I always want to encourage people to figure out what is ailing you. Because the way that our consciousness works, almost everything, at least in my beliefs, everything that we are, how we show up, how we manifest, how we talk, how we treat others, how we treat ourselves, is a reflection of something that happened in the past, and or that we're currently dealing with in our present, right? And and I know this is a bold ass statement, but all of us need to reach back and heal some aspect of ourselves, right?
I agree.
And this was my journey to do so. So for example, and I remember I was talking about the smaller works, Place of Breath and Birth, that are specifically about my personal heritage, or an aspect of my personal heritage. And then, then through that research, through that journey, through the back and forth between District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, I realized, I realized that this is not just about the treatment of Puerto Rico. This is about a whole community of people. So what I'm saying is, as through healing yourself, in whatever way that manifests for you, you can also heal others. And it's like, believe that you have the power to heal yourself, and 2, you have the power to heal others, through intentionality. And I think that's it. Oh, okay. So
Yeah, how can people-
Amber
yeah.
Amber Robles-Gordon. So my website is literally Amber Robles-Gordon, AmberRoblesGordon.com. My email address is the same at Gmail. I am on Instagram. I am on Facebook, and it's my name.
Well, Amber,
And
thank
come see
you.
the show.
Yeah,
It's up at Titty Contemporary, and it's Sovereignty, Acts, Forms, and Measures of Protest and Resistance.
Shout out to Susan for allowing us to use this beautiful space for the interview in Teeny Contemporary right here in downtown Nashville on 5th Avenue. Come check it out. Thank you, Amber,
Thank
for this
you.
amazing conversation.
It's a good conversation.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you I just hope you enjoyed it. And I did. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed your energy, your spirit.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Same here.
No, thank you. And when you're back in Nashville,
Yes.
I'm giving you that tour.
Right.
And we're gonna talk again.
Okay.
All right. So I appreciate your time and thanks.
Thank you.